Do you want to learn how to improve your knowledge of English grammar? Or perhaps you would simply like to hone your grammar skills so you can feel more confident when it's time to press send, submit, or publish on your articles, blog posts, and even books. Hi there, my name is Brian Collins. Welcome to the Become a Writer Today channel. In this video, I'm going to give you a number of different strategies that you can use to improve your grammar skills. I've used these strategies over the years when I was working as a journalist and later when I started publishing articles online and even for self-publishing my books. Now the key caveat is, while it's important to have a good knowledge of English grammar, I wouldn't let a fear of common grammar mistakes get in the way of publishing your work or submitting it, because it's easier than ever to fix your mistakes today, and that's something I'll cover in the video. My first grammar tip for you is to use a well-recognized and well-regarded style guide. Now, if you're writing for publication, ask the editor what style guide they're following, or if they have any particular notes that you need to follow before submitting your work. On the other hand, if you're publishing on your own website or you're getting ready to self-publish a book, pick a style guide that you can use so you can figure out how to address common grammar issues like punctuation, citations, and so on. And this is helpful because if you're working with an editor, they can refer to the same style guide. There's lots of different style guides online that you can find. One style guide that's particularly popular and that I like, and which you can actually take out a free trial for, is the Chicago Manual of Style. So this has been around for years. It's well recognized by media organizations, and they've lots of great insights on different conundrums that you might come up or face when you're editing your work. So for example, if I click on the punctuation section, I can see that there's a lot of information about all of the different punctuation queries I may have. So here's one here: punctuate periods and commas in relation to closing quotation marks. Should I put the period or comma before or after the quotation mark? Well, according to the Chicago Manual of Style, I should put it before the quotation mark. Now you may find other style guides that will differ and say you should put the full stop outside of the quotation mark, but it's best to pick one style guide and follow it, so whatever you're writing or publishing is consistent. And that's key when you're learning English grammar and when you're applying English grammar rules. To be consistent, because if you're going to adhere to a rule or break a rule, and I'll talk about that in a few moments, do the same throughout your articles or throughout your blog posts or throughout your book, because it's more jarring when you're not consistent with how you adhere to common English grammar rules. If you're new to learning English grammar, there are 3 books that I recommend you pick up alongside a good style guide. So the first book is by Lynn Truss and it's called Eats, Shoots and Leaves. And considering grammar can be quite a dry topic, it's actually a really engaging read that has lots of practical examples about how to use everything from the semicolon to the comma. And Lynn also makes a good case for why you should follow grammar rules. So I'd recommend you start with this particular book. The next grammar book that's a classic that's worth picking up is called The Elements of Style. This has been around since the early 20th century, and it's basically the book that all journalists and writers regularly refer to and cite when there's a grammar rule that they want to figure out if it's worth following or worth breaking. So every writer should have this on their desk because it's kind of like a reference book, but it's also a type of book that's an engaging read too. Now, the final book that I recommend picking up is the Oxford Modern English Grammar book. This is a reference book, so it's like a dictionary, so you can actually look up specific grammar issues in this book. It's pretty big, so you'll need to stick it on your bookshelf near where you write. But this is another book that you can have, and it will cover differences between British and American English as well. So you do have that extra benefit when you pick up this book. But in short, reading this book and using this book as a reference book will give you a good background and give you an excellent library that you can refer to for learning the basics and even the advanced grammar rules. My next tip for you is to consider where you're based and where your article or your work will appear. So I'm based in Ireland and I naturally use British English, or you could technically say Irish English. And sometimes when I use this form of English online, I get queries from readers saying, have you misspelled something or is it grammatically incorrect? Well, there's a few subtle differences between American and British English. So British English tends to use IS, whereas American English will use IZ. So an example here will be realize. So this is how you would write it in British English. And in America, it will be realize with a Z. Another example relates to RE versus ER. So in Ireland, I would say I'm at the centre, I'm at the shopping centre, RE, whereas in America, you might say I'm at the shopping centre, as in ER. And of course, you also have to factor in the fact that there are different words used in different contexts in both languages. So for example, in America, you would say I'm at the shopping mall, whereas those kind of words are probably not used that often in the United Kingdom or in Ireland. Similarly, in Ireland, we use the word crack, which is a slang word, which means you're having a good time, whereas crack refers to drugs in the United States. So do consider what audience you're writing for. And what I recommend you do is open up your writing application of choice. And normally they will default to whatever the automatic language is in your operating system. But if you're going to write for a different country, change it from British English to American English, or Australian or Canadian English. And there is subtle differences between all of these. So do factor that in. But if you're in doubt, typically American English is the way to go for when you're writing online. English grammar is tricky. There's a lot of rules to follow and to learn. What I recommend you do is keep a running list of common grammar mistakes that you regularly make. And then you can refer to this over time and you'll naturally learn what to look out for. Now, in another video on the channel, I've covered 10 plus common grammar mistakes that writers often make. And it's based on a list that I keep for myself about grammar mistakes to watch out for. I go into detail in these common grammar mistakes in that video, but here's one example. IT'(S) versus its. So IT'(S) is short for it is, so it is a hungry dog. Whereas its with no apostrophe refers to possession, so the dog ate its dinner. So when you're reviewing your work, ask yourself, what mistakes do you make regularly? Does it relate to comma placements? Does it relate to how you use apostrophes? Does it relate to the use of spellings? And so on. And then keep a little file on your computer that you can refer to when you're self-editing your work for grammar mistakes. My next tip for improving your grammar relates to how you're going to self-edit your articles. And again, I have a video where I go into detail on self-editing on the channel. But this tip boils down to reformatting your work. So typically, if you have a blog post that's only several hundred words long, you can do this on screen, where if it's a book chapter like I have here open at the moment, you could reformat your work and then print it out. This step will help you spot issues more easily. So right now, this is formatted as Times New Roman regular 12, which is a standard font that writers will use. What I recommend you do is change it to Courier or Courier Prime. You can get that font for free on Google Fonts. Change the font size to 14 and change the line size to 2.0. That will immediately make it a lot larger, and you will automatically start to spot grammar mistakes that you overlooked previously because it'll look different to the eye. And the other advantage of formatting it like this is when you print it out, you will have lots of space between the lines to write in your corrections and to circle your grammar mistakes with a red pen. While you're self-editing your work, go through your work once to look at the overall structure of your articles or your book chapter and see that it makes sense. During this step, you're not going to worry too much about grammar mistakes. In fact, I only recommend that you look for grammar issues and mistakes in your work during a third or final edit. The reason is there's no point obsessing about grammar mistakes and making sure your spellings and so on are perfect if you're going to rewrite entire sections of your work. It's during the final phase before you get ready to publish that you're going to fix these mistakes. Now that said, the caveat is if you see something underlined with the inbuilt grammar checker, just go ahead and fix it automatically. But it's only when you're going through that final step, that is reformatting it and printing it out or even reading it aloud to yourself, that you're going to fix other grammar mistakes that the inbuilt grammar checker in your writing software might have missed. Speaking of the inbuilt grammar software in Mac or on Windows, it will find and fix most grammar mistakes. But you also need to go and take an extra step by printing your work out or by reading it aloud and looking for grammar issues that I could potentially have overlooked. I also recommend using a dedicated grammar checker. So right now I've installed the premium version of Grammarly into Mac OS, and they've recently updated this app. So it works across all of the writing applications on my computer. So I have open here an article that I wrote about NFTs for another site that I'm running. And you can see here that some of the mistakes are underlined in red, but Grammarly has also scored it. So I can click on this and then it'll go through the article and start pointing out potential grammar mistakes or even just potential sentences I want to line edit or copy edit. So in this case, I have used the word surely. So you can see this down here, and Grammarly, this isn't a grammar mistake, just Grammarly is suggesting that there's a different word I can use so I can accept this change. And it's also saying that excellent might be a better word than good. So what I will do is have this, or I'll write my article as normal in my writing application of choice. This particular application is Ulysses, is what I use to publish articles online. And then I'll open up the Grammarly editor and go through all of the suggestions and see if the grammar suggestions make sense or not. And that is, of course, the key caveat. As the writer, and the editor, you need to make the final decision about what grammar changes to accept or reject. To give you an example, there's a word I use here called hodlers, which is commonly used by those who write about crypto and NFT. It means holding on to your crypto or NFTs rather than selling it. But technically it's slang and jargon, and Grammarly has flagged it as a grammar issue. But because I know what the topic is about, I can decide that this is a grammar or potential grammar mistake that I want to keep into the article because it makes sense for the audience. That said, I do find that tools like Grammarly will catch a lot more errors than what the typical grammar checker in Word, Pages, Mac, Windows, and so on will catch. Alongside using Grammarly, there's another tool that I use regularly when I want to learn more about English grammar. And like Grammarly, it supports British and American English. It's called Pro Writing Aid, and I've reviewed it in detail on the channel. So I pasted in an article into Pro Writing Aid, and it's found 16 grammar issues. And I can cycle through these inside of the article and see which ones I want to fix versus ignore. And again, when I click on one of these, it's going to give me some context about what the grammar rule is that I've broken, and I can decide whether I want to follow this grammar rule or ignore it. There's also some additional grammar reports that I can use. For example, I can look for overused words, I can use a thesaurus, and so on. And I can get context for all of these rules and reports. So if you want to take your editing to the next level, then this is a good tool to use. Typically, I use Grammarly for short form articles and blog posts, and I might use this for longer form works like a book chapter. But both will help you learn the finer points of English grammar. My key goal with this video is to show you ways you can improve your knowledge of English grammar, not just fix grammar issues. And again, this is why I also like Grammarly, because if you have the premium version, it will give context to the changes in your work. So for example, it's saying here that there is a synonym that I could potentially use, so I could use the word private instead of personal. And it's giving me a bit of extra context, saying the word personal appears repeatedly in the text. Similarly, if I find a grammar rule that I've broken, so I have inconsistent hyphenation in the article, it's giving me some additional context about why I'd need to fix this issue. So let's put in a grammar mistake so I can show you an example of how you can learn more about grammar using this type of software. So I have it sits. So let's say I wrote it's sits. Now if I click on this, it's saying that there was a pronoun problem here, and it has the fix for me. But if I click on the learn more box or the learn more tab, it'll give me some additional information about how to correctly use pronouns. So if you're new to writing in English, or you're learning the basics of English grammar rules, this is a good way to actually see how these grammar rules apply to whatever it is you've just written. And ultimately, that's how you learn the rules of English grammar. It's by writing and by making mistakes, and then by going back and fixing them. It's not enough to just read a great grammar book. My next tip for you is to work with an editor. So years ago, when I self-published my first book, I didn't have much money, and I figured I could self-edit it myself because I'd worked as a journalist. Well, that was a bad idea, because I self-published a book, and even though I thought it was free of issues, I started getting emails from buyers on Amazon saying that there was grammar mistakes and other problems with the book. I eventually took it down and rewrote it, and I hired an editor who immediately spotted issues in the book and helped me fix them. Since then, I always recommend working with an editor if you're going to self-publish a book. The service that I use these days to find an editor is called reedsy.com. Now you can pay between $1,000 and $2,000, and even more depending on how much editing your book needs. But you're getting two things. Firstly, you're getting feedback that will help you improve the quality of your manuscript. But secondly, consider it an investment in your writing education. So when you work with an editor, they will help you learn some English grammar rules and issues that you've potentially overlooked or that you were unaware of, or some quirks in your writing. And then you can use that to improve at your next creative project. Now, perhaps you're not writing a book, but you still want to work with an editor. Well, you can use a service like Upwork to find an editor. You can pay upwards from $20 an hour to find a good one, and they can help you edit your articles or your paper or whatever it is you're working on. Now, I run a series of content publishing websites, and I currently employ 2 contract editors for the sites. So basically, I commission articles to freelance writers, and then when the writers submit these articles, I send them to editors who fix issues in these articles. And that's the way media organizations and newspapers work too. So if you're going to take writing professionally or seriously, at some point you will either need to work with an editor if you're writing for another publication, or you'll need to hire one if you're self-publishing your work or taking content publishing a bit more seriously. My next tip for you involves ignoring the grammar Nazis. If you're not sure what a grammar Nazi is, it's basically a reader or an editor or a critic who emails you or who gets in touch regularly complaining that you broke some obscure grammar rule, like a badly used semicolon or a misplaced comma. Well, as the writer and the editor, it's your job to decide what grammar rules to adhere to and which ones to break. If you're going to go ahead and break a grammar rule, I recommend you at least know what the grammar rule is before you go ahead and break it. And if you are going to break one, as I mentioned earlier, be consistent. So don't follow the grammar rule at the start of your article and then break it halfway through. Consistency is always better than being 100% accurate and following every grammar rule that's out there. And of course, it really does depend on where your article is being published. So if, for example, you're publishing something on social media as a Twitter thread, you're probably not going to care as much about full stops because you're more concerned with getting engagement. On the other hand, if you're writing for an academic publication, then the placement of your full stops, colons and semicolons really does matter. So you need to decide how important it is to follow every single grammar rule before you press publish. Now, of course, the beauty of writing something online is that it's quick and easy to go back and fix something later on. So don't let worrying or fears of the grammar Nazis get in the way of publishing your work. Those are my tips for learning English grammar, but perhaps to sum it all up, if you want to get better at writing in English and if you want to publish with more confidence, then just simply get into the habit of reading and writing more frequently. Publish your work, send it out to editors and get feedback from editors and from readers, because the best way to improve is by doing. So I hope you enjoyed the content in this video. If you do, hit thumbs up, and if you have more questions or if you'd like to get more videos like this, let me know in the comments section below.